بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we are going to discuss chapter 10 about capital budgeting techniques. A main important steps in this chapter is to understand the key elements of the capital budgeting process and discuss different techniques that can be used in comparing different projects. In this chapter, we are going to discuss four basic methods for assessing different projects. The first technique is called payback period. The second one is net present value. The third one is internal rate of return, and the fourth one is profitability index. First of all, what is the meaning of capital budgeting? Capital budgeting, it's a process of evaluating and selecting long-term investments that are consistent with the firm goal of maximizing owner wealth. In this capital budgeting, there is a specific expenditure. It's called capital expenditure. Capital expenditure, it's an outlay of fund by the firm that is expected to produce benefits over a period of time greater than 1 year. However, the operating expenditure is an outlay of funds by the firm resulting in benefits received within 1 year. And this is the basic difference between capital expenditure and operating expenditures. In the capital expenditure, it's extended over a period of time greater than 1 year, but in the operating expenditure, it's related to a period of time within 1 year. The capital budgeting process consists of 5 steps. Step number 1, proposal generation. Step number 2, review and analysis of different investment proposals, and then step number 3, decision making, and step number 4, implementation. After we get the approval and the expenditures are made, we start to implement a specific project and finally follow up. Those are the basic 5 steps related to the capital budgeting process. In capital budgeting process, during the comparison between different projects, you must consider 2 basic differences between the project. Number 1, it's called independent projects. Number 2, it's mutually exclusive project. What is an independent project? Independent projects, those are projects whose cash flows are unrelated to one another. This means that the acceptance of one doesn't eliminate the others from further consideration. If we have 2 projects and those 2 projects are independent projects, the selection of one of those of this project will not hinder, will not eliminate the selection of the other project. However, in the mutually exclusive projects, those are projects that compete with one another. So the acceptance of one eliminate from others considerations of this project. Yani if you decided to select one, this means that you will not be able to select the other one. Why? Because those projects are mutually exclusive projects. Therefore, it's very important in the beginning of your comparison between two projects, when you try to compare between independent projects and the mutually exclusive project, to understand the basic differences between them. Why? For instance, imagine that you have unlimited funds. But if you have unlimited fund, this means that you are able to implement two projects, for example. So if you are facing two independent projects and you have unlimited fund, in this case, if you are going to accept, you will be able to accept two projects at the same time. But if your fund is so limited, this means that if you are going to choose between two projects, in this case you must try to select one because you have limited fund and so on. Also, when you compare between two projects, we have two decisions. The first one is accept and reject decision. The second one is to conduct ranking approach. Accept reject approach is the evaluation of capital expenditure proposals to determine whether they meet the firm minimum acceptance criteria or not. This is the accept and reject approach. But in the case of ranking approach, is the ranking of capital expenditure project in the basis of some predetermined measures such as rate of return. And if I have two projects, one is achieving higher rate of return, so I could rank them. This is rank number 1, this is rank number 2, and so on. Let us now the summary of the previous part. Capital budgeting process. It's a process, consists of 5 steps. During those 5 steps, you must take in your consideration the expected cash flow that would be achieved from a specific project, and it will be compared with capital expenditures related to such a project. In your comparison, you must determine what is the type of those projects, whether those projects are independent or whether those projects are mutually exclusive. Why? Because the decision, it will differ in case number 1 compared to case number 2. Also, in your ranking approach, you try to make a rank, and this rank should be based on a predetermined measure such as the rate of return. Also, we have the accept and reject project approach. And this approach is the evaluation of capital expenditure proposals to determine whether they meet the fair minimum acceptance criteria. Let us take an example for this. Imagine this is two projects, and those two projects is project A and project B. This project includes two types of cash flows, cash inflow and cash outflows. Cash inflows, those are the cash that will be inside your corporation as a result of the activity of this project. Our cash flows, this will be in a shape of initial investment. In the project A, the initial investment is 42,000, and the in cash flows it's 5 cash flows at the end of the year 1 up to year 5. The same situation for project B. We have an initial investment. First of all, we must figure out such a type of project using what we call timeline. Timeline, it's a method that depicts the conventional cash flows of project A and B. As you see, we have 5 years starting from 0 to 5. At time 0, which is today, we have an out cash flows in an amount of 42,000 as initial investment, and every year from year 1 to year 5 we have in cash flows. The same situation for project B. Our initial investment is minus 45,000, and at the end of each year we have a specific in cash flow. Based on this given information, please compare between project A and B, and which one would you like to choose, A or B? In this case, for the comparison between two projects, you need to use a specific method for a comparison between A and B. The first approach is called the payback period method. What is the payback period method? It's the amount of time required for a firm to recover its initial investment in a project. Yani, if I will pay today, for example, 10,000, I would like to know after how many period of time I will be able to get back such 10,000. In this case, after we determine the payback method, we need to a specific criteria. Our criteria is the youngest of the maximum acceptable payback period, which is determined by management. Every management specifies the acceptable payback period of time. We should compare the payback period, which is a computed one, with the acceptable one. If the payback period, the computed one, is less than the maximum acceptable payback period, in this case we should accept the project. يبقى إذا كانت فترة الاسترداد المحسوبة أقل من فترة الاسترداد المقبولة بواسطة الإدارة، في هذه الحالة we accept the project. However, if the payback period is greater than the maximum acceptable payback period, in this case we should reject our project. So how could we determine this? Let us give a look for project A. in project A, our payback period is 3 years. How we determined it's 3 years? This is our initial investment. We divide it by the annual cash inflow. Our initial investment is 42,000 divided by the annual cash inflow, which is 14,000. In this case, our payback is 3 years. Please, we are using this method if the annual cash inflow is constant. Yani, right, in project A, every year we have 14,000 US dollars. However, in some project, the cash inflow is not constant, but it is mixed, such as in project B. In project B, it generates a mixed stream of cash inflows. But how could we calculate the payback period in this case? First, in the first year, the firm will recover 28 of 45 as initial investment. By the end of year 2, the firm will recover 40, which is 28 years of the first year plus 12 years from the second year. This will be recovered. The total is 40, will be recovered by the end of the third year. At the end of the third year, we have 50,000 will have been recovered. However, we didn't need 50 because our initial investment is 45. So this means that only 50% of the year in the cash stream is needed to complete our payback method. This means that the project B will recover its initial investment, which is 45,000. It will be recovered only in 2.5 years. In this case, however this is acceptable or not, we said that you must compare your computed payback periods with the acceptable period. For example, if our acceptable payback period according to the management is 2 years, this means that both of A and B should be rejected. Why? Because the calculated payback period exceeds the acceptable one. But imagine that the acceptable period of time is 3 years. But in this case, project B will be accepted. Why? Because the payback period is 2.5 years, which is yes, the acceptable payback period, which is 3 years. But in this case, we should accept. As you see, one of the advantage of the payback method, it's very easy to be calculated. As you see, you just give a look for the initial investment and in cash flows, and then you determine after how many years such initial investment will be recovered. If you have a constant stream cash flow, you just divide your initial investment by the constant cash flow, and then you determine the payback period. If a cash flow is not constant, it is mixed. In this case, you accumulate your cash flow. For example, in the first year, you have a specific amount. in the second year you have additional amount, so you accumulate it and so on until you determine after how many years we will be able to recover our initial investment. So one of the advantage of the payback period method, it's very easy to be calculated. However, the greatest weakness of the payback period of time, it ignores time value of money. As you see, we just take sum of a cash flow come at the end of the first year plus a cash flow come at the end of the second year, and we didn't take in our consideration the impact of time on the value of money, and this is the greatest weakness of a payback period, that it ignores the concept of time value of money. This is why, to avoid such a problem, we use what we call a NPV, net present value. The second approach, which is net present value, is a modification for the payback method, because the net present value, it considers the impact of time on the value of your money. So if we would like to define what is NPV, NPV, net present value, it's a very sophisticated capital budgeting techniques. We found it by using the following equation. NPV is equal to PV of cash inflows minus the initial investment. يبقى again NPV equals to present value of cash inflows minus the initial investment. يبقى as you see mathematically, NPV, it is a PV of cash inflow. It's the sum of CF discounted by a specific discount rate 1 plus R power 2t minus our initial investment. If you give a look for this equation, you will find that NPV could be positive, or NPV could be negative, or NPV could be 0. If NPV is greater than 0, يعني NPV is positive, in this case we should accept the project. If the NPV is less than 0, in this case we should reject the project. If NPV equal to 0, you are in neutral decision. Example for this, here in our project, this is project A and this is project B. This is our initial cost, and this is in cash inflows. This is cash inflows. But first we determine NPV for project A. NPV is equal to a PV of cash inflows minus a PV of cash outflows, which is the initial investment. But in this case, NPV is equal to 11,071. The same for project B. Our NPV is 10,904. But as you see, project A and the project B is positive according to the criteria of NPV. وفقا لقواعد القبول, we accept the two projects. Why? Because NPV of project A is positive, NPV of project B is positive, but we should accept. But this is under two conditions. Number one, we have unlimited limited fund. We have unlimited fund. Number two projects are independent projects. يعني selection of A will not hinder or eliminate the selection of B. But imagine that those two projects are mutually exclusive project. In this case, we must select the project with the highest NBV. Why? Because those projects are mutually exclusive project. This means that the selection of one of those projects will hinder the selection of the second project. So we must select the project with the highest NBV. وده ملحوظة مهمة. يبقى أجي بعد ما حضرتك تحسبي NBV تبدأ تسأل نفسك أي two projects دول هل هم مستقلين يعني independent ولا mutually exclusive يعني بيعتمد أحدهما أو اختيار أحدهما بيمنع اختيار آخر. لو ان two projects are independent مستقلين في هذه الحالة إذا كانت ال NBV لكل منهما موجبة يتم اختيار كلاهما. ولكن إذا كان ال two projects are mutually exclusive يعني اختيار أحدهما يمنع اختيار الآخر في هذه الحالة in this case يجب أن نختار the highest one. طب هل ممكن ان احنا NBV ده نقدر نحسبها بدل ما نحسبها بالطريقه اليدويه هل ممكن احسبها بالاكسل شيت؟ of course طبعا نقدر نحسبها. عندنا هنا example. This is an example of how we could find the net present value using the Excel sheet. How it is بشكل مختصر جدا. حضرتك first you start by data entry. تبدأ بإدخال أي بيانات. طب إزاي أدخل أي بيانات؟ عندي هنا السنة اللي هو year من 0 حتى 5 وعندنا هنا أي project اللي احنا بنسميه أي project. ندخل هنا في السنة 0 this is the initial investment. طالما initial investment يعني cost بتدخلها في إكسل إما بماينس أو between two brackets. بعد كده بتدخل الكاش in flows as you see at the end of each year we have 14,000. After you finish data entry you will come to a new cell and try to write the following Excel formula which is equal NBV. N capital B capital V capital open brackets. Then the first part is the interest rate. You write down the name of the cell where the interest rate is existed. As you see, the interest rate is 10%, is existed in C2, in column C, and row 2, it will be known C2. But C2 it will reflect where the interest rate is existed. Then comma, and then you take a cash flow started from P6 until B10, from B6 to B10, and then this is your cash inflow plus a cash outflow which is existed in B5 which is minus 42,000. After you finish such expression, you just enter, then you will find the value of your NBV. Again, by the end of this section, you must know how could you use the payback period method for comparison between two projects. You must be aware of the decision criteria related to the payback method. The second approach is using NBV صافي القيمة الحالية هو NBV بيساوي a PV of cash inflows minus a PV of cash outflows which is the initial investment. Then you must be aware of the decision criteria related to NPV, where NPV, if it is positive, you are going to accept the project. If the NPV is negative, you are going to reject the project. If NPV is equal to 0, in this case, it's a neutral decision. The third approach for comparison between different projects, it's called the profitability index. Actually, profitability index مؤشر الربحية. مؤشر الربحية is simply equal to the present value of cash inflow divided by the initial cash outflow. يبقى the profitability index P capital I capital PI is equal to the PV of cash inflow divided by the initial outflow. In this case, we will have the decision criteria. If a PI is more than 1, we must accept the project. If a PI is less than 1, we reject the project. If a PI equal to 0, this is a neutral decision. By implementing this on our project A and the project B, as you see, in project A, the profitability index of A is equal to a PV of cash inflow divided by the initial investment. This is equal to 1.26. In project B, the profitability index in project B is equal to 55.924 divided by 45,000. In this case, it will be 1.24. In this case, if you have unlimited fund, you are going to accept both projects. Why you are going to accept both projects? Because the PI of both of them are more than 1, we should accept it. But if you have a limited fund, or those two projects are mutually exclusive, in this case we should choose the highest one, that is project A. And this is the third one. By the end of this part, what I need from you in this chapter. First of all, you must understand what is the payback period method, the advantage and the disadvantage of the payback method, decision criteria of the payback method. Then you must understand what is the net present value. How could we compute the net present value? What is the decision criteria regarding the net present value? And finally, the profitability index. What is the profitability index? What is the decision criteria in the case of profitability index? The fourth technique, it's called internal rate of return, IRR. And actually the internal rate of return, it's a sophisticated capital budgeting technique. Could be defined as the discount rate that equates the NPV of an investment opportunity with 0. Yani, in other words, if you are using internal rate of return in the NPV equation, you will find that NPV is equal to 0. In this case, this internal rate of return refers to the rate of return that the firm will earn if it invests in a project and receive the given cash inflow. And this is a good tool, could be used in any feasibility study, because I would like to know what type of rate that I'm going to achieve if I decided to invest in such a type of a project. In this case, after we determine the internal rate of return, we must have a decision criteria. One of the decision criteria is if the internal rate of return is greater than the cost of capital. In this case, we should accept the project. If the internal rate of return is less than the cost of capital, in this case, we should reject such project. Here, this is an example of two projects, project A and project B. How could we here? Of course, according to the definition, for example, this is our initial investment and this is our initial cash inflows at the end of each year. I'm looking for what is the internal rate of return that I could use that equate the initial investment and the potential in cash flows to be NBV equal to 0. This is what we defined it, because we said that the internal rate of return, it is the rate at which the NBV equal to 0. So how could we determine it exactly? Actually, in algebra, we have different techniques could be used for determining the internal rate of return, but actually I prefer to determine the internal rate of return using the Excel sheet. It's very quickly, it saves you time and effort. Imagine that I determine the internal rate of return. In this case, it's 90%. The same situation for internal rate of return for P. It's 21.7%. Then we come to our decision criteria. Imagine that our cost of capital is 10%. But in this case, the internal rate of return of project A is more than the 10%, which is the cost of capital. But we accept the project. Internal rate of return of B is more than 10%. In this case, we accept the project. Through comparing the two projects, we would prefer project B over project A, because the internal rate of return of B is more than the internal rate of return of A, especially if those two projects are mutually exclusive project. In this case, we prefer B because the internal rate of return of B is more than the internal rate of return of A. The question is how we determine the internal rate of return. As I told you, different techniques could be used for determining, but I prefer to determine it through Excel sheet. To determine the internal rate of return through the Excel sheet, it could be determined as follows. Here, this is year and this is a project A. As you see, in the year started from 0 to 5. We enter all types of cash flow, whether in cash flow or out cash flow. To determine the internal rate of return is very easy. We come to the say B10, for example, and we write the following form: equal internal rate of return, open brackets, and then taking all types of cash flow, whether it's out cash flow or in cash flow, and starting from P4 to P9, close the brackets, enter, then you will have your internal rate of return. As you see, both to determine which one is the best, here the project B is achieving higher rate of return than A. In this case, we should select project B because it achieves higher rate of return compared to project A. At the end of this lecture, capital budgeting techniques are we stop at this slide. Capital budgeting techniques are very important. and it's very prefer to take this in your consideration. We have different techniques. The most accurate one is the net present value and internal rate of return. Thank you for your attention and see you in the coming lecture inshallah ta'ala with my best wishes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.